Hi, I'm Dani Castellano, and this is Diet Culture, the podcast where sometimes I interview amazing people and professionals in the field of healing relationships with food, and sometimes I chat with my brother and fellow human who also hates diet culture, Nick. We talk about diet culture, a systemic and oppressive force in all of our lives that wastes our time at best and destroys livelihood at worst. We dissect the problems, share stories, and give suggestions on where we can all go from here. This podcast is for informational, educational, and inspirational purposes only, and never a substitution for individual medical or nutritional advice. For this episode, I was joined by Dr. Hortencia Jimenez, who was born in Nayarit, Mexico, and raised in the agricultural community of Watsonville, California. Dr. Jimenez spent her childhood years working in the fields and learned the ethic of hard work and perseverance. She holds a BA, MA, and PhD in sociology and is also a certified health coach and fitness instructor. Dr. Jimenez is a full-time tenured sociology professor teaching at a local community college in Monterey County. Dr. Jimenez signed a book contract with Sage Publishing, a leading press in the social sciences, to co-author an undergraduate textbook on Latinx. Her research writing has appeared in academic publications, and in 2017 she published her book, Challenging Inequalities, Readings in Race, Ethnicity, and Immigration by Conella Academic Publishing. Dr. Jimenez has numerous awards and recognitions for her work in the Latinx community. Her most recent recognitions include the Community Achievements Award by the Latino Network of Monterey County, a certificate of recognition by the Monterey County Board of Supervisors, and a certificate of recognition by California Legislature Assembly Ana Caballero. Dr. Jimenez transitioned to social media during the pandemic and created her Instagram account at Dr. Hortencia Jimenez as a response to the lack of Latinx representation and conversation of an anti-diet approach in the health and wellness industry. Her work centers on dismantling diet culture and helping Latinx heal their relationship with food. This was such a lovely, beautiful conversation to have. Dr. Jimenez was so vulnerable. We talked about her lens on this work as being a sociologist and just how important her culture is to her and helping people to understand the oppression that is layered in with diet culture and the steps that we need to take to really dismantle diet culture. Hi, Dr. Jimenez.
Hi, good afternoon.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast. I'm excited to share the space with you and your listeners.
Thank you for being here. Where in the world are you recording from?
Yes, I am in Salinas, California, Monterey County, Central Coast.
Okay, cool. I'm in Denver.
Awesome.
Okay, so to get us started, I want to hear a little bit about how you entered the anti-diet space and this realm of doing this work.
Yes. Well, first and foremost, thanks again for the invitation. It really connects to my lived experience. I love eating food. It's part of my identity. It's part of my culture. And there's always been this duality in my family where you're encouraged to eat your cultural foods, but then there's a lot of shaming around the food, a lot of criticizing around body image. And so all these like microaggressions that I received growing up I didn't think that they had an impact on me until I got into puberty and when I became a teenager and when I went off to college. I did a couple of diets trying to like lose weight. I ended up internalizing a lot of these fallacies, a lot of these like really problematic ideals about body image. And obviously I knew my worth, but there's these Western ideas about beauty that are really not attainable. And, I went through my own healing journey. And then when I had my kids, I feel that was a pivotal moment in my life where I went from like not doing diets when I was single, and then I got, married and I had my kids, to becoming like this healthified person, like, oh, certain foods are bad for you. I ended up being very dogmatic about that. And that's very bad. And I think that's also part of diet culture. So I went through like different phases. And over the last, I would say maybe 10 years, I've been doing an anti-diet approach in my life, in my family, and also in the community where I live, where I do workshops. And then more recently on Instagram, where I started this platform and where you met me.
Yeah.
That's where I've been more like vocal about it.
Okay. So when you first started or remember some of these messages, was it coming more from like doctors and media, or was it also partially from your family trying to adopt a westernized culture?
It's a combination, being my training is a sociologist. I'm a professor. And so I understand like the different dynamics of diet culture and the different institutions that shape us, right? And have an influence. And obviously one of the first institutions is the family, right? Because this is where we grow up. This is where we learn about food. This is where we're socialized and we're conditioned, where our food traumas or experiences are at. So like I said, I always had like a really good relationship with food. I love eating, I love cooking, and there's a lot of memories that I have with my family when it comes to that connection to our foods. But then at the same time is that negotiating that shaming about you're either eating too much or too little. It's like you're never enough, right? And I still get that. That's why I am so passionate about the work that I'm doing, because I still experience these types of toxic messages from family. So yes, the family is the first one. And then of course, like your peer groups. But when I was in high school, frankly, I don't think I was exposed to, or at least my friends back then, like in diets or body image. Obviously, the body image part, but no dieting. And I think it really just amplified when I got to college. And living in I lived in the dorms for 2 years. So that probably had an impact, now that I'm actually reflecting with you, living in the dorms for 2 years probably had an impact on my food. So yes, the family. And of course, being in college and the media, for sure, it is very toxic, as you know. So these distorted ideals and images that are just unrealistic.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to hear your perspective being in the sociology field more so. As a dietitian, obviously, I understand parts of that, but it's so cool to connect with you to get to hear and kind of pick your brain a little bit about how you understand things differently from that realm.
Yeah, that's why I love connecting with you and a lot of dietitians that I've been in conversation online on Instagram. It's we talk about the same things from a different lens. Maybe it's the language that we're using, but they all point to the same problematic diet narrative. So that's why it's so beautiful, right? We bring our own perspectives, like lived experiences, but our own training.
Yeah. What kind of work are you doing in your community, or have you been that kind of got
Yes.
this?
Uh-huh. Absolutely. Well, I've been involved in the Latino. I'm Mexican. I'm a Latina, and so I've been involved in the community since I was in college. And when I was in my early 20s, I'm 42. So it's been for 20 years in different areas. Like I started in the nonprofit immigrant rights, community education, citizenship, leadership development in that area. And that really informed my research and, my dissertation and all that graduate stuff. And then the field of sociology and food, there's this field of sociologists studying food, and it's so broad. It's just like, it's overwhelming. It is exciting. You can just imagine there's a whole field of sociology and food, and there's different experts and like doctors, you specialize in different areas. And I'm really interested and invested in understanding diet culture from an intersectional, decolonial, social, and racial justice framework, because that's my training. So I feel like that's what I'm bringing. I don't want to say that it's new, but that is different in Instagram, right? I think those conversations are missing, and I'm adding to the conversation of other dietitians who are addressing like racial equity and the social determinants of health, right? And so I'm just joining the conversation.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I would love to dig into that with you a little bit, because I think you're right. We're in this space where most people probably understand and have heard what diet culture is, but it's like, okay, what do we actually need to do from here? And I feel like just from the little bit that I've gotten to see from your Instagram and the things that you're sharing, I think that stuff is so needed. But what do you think are some like action items that we need to be taking?
Yes, thank you. That's why I'm honestly, I feel so honored that you invited me, because this is where like the work that I'm doing, the work that other women of color are doing that need to be amplified, because one of the things that I see that's missing is this, right? So you said, how do we address this? Is becoming knowledgeable and aware and allowing yourself to be open about understanding diet culture, right? So the perspective that I'm bringing from a social and racial lens, I've gotten pushback from people, from trolls. People who actually, some people who follow me, right? And then unfortunately, I have to call, it's been white women who've said, I follow you because of these recipes, but what is what is privilege? What is race or racism have anything to do with this, right? And so, those are microaggressions, and then they question my integrity, they question my knowledge. So like, that's hard, right? So one is understanding the diet culture is so broad, and we don't hear it enough, how it's connected to racism, how it's connected to white supremacy. I guess it's because dietitians in general, like Instagram is still a predominantly white space, right? Like being a sociologist, so like we have to identify that that's the reality. And here comes a woman of color, like Latina, and there's like Black dietitians who are talking about this. And so there's that pushback, right? So I think that's one of the first things we need to do is be aware. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of amazing dietitians that I follow who are doing groundbreaking work. So I'm looking for their work. Oh, what's here? Oh yeah, I love Christy Harrison.
I have that book. I love her too. Yes.
Like she gets it. Like she totally understands that. And there's a couple other white women as well that are dietitians and health coaches, right? Yeah. But I think the pushback always comes when you're like a woman of color. So, that's how it is. That's how it is in society. So like, I'm aware, but still hard.
Yeah. And I really appreciate you saying that, because that's a big thing with this podcast is I understand with the privileges I hold that I can't be the person to, like, I can amplify and I can explain, but this is a collaborative approach, and it's not my job as a white person to step in and make this about me. And I really think that the fragility of white people, especially with everything that's been brought to light that unfortunately shouldn't have taken so long for a lot of people to start to pay attention to. No, I think that we need to be called out. Like, I want to be called out because I think that that's so important, like for your voice to be heard. It's essential. So it really makes me sad that people are coming onto your platform to question.
Yes. And that's, that's the reality, unfortunately, that's what we women of color have to go through. I had to go through that in grad school. Like, this doesn't change. That's why I get emotional, because it doesn't matter how knowledgeable we are, like how many, if we have credentials and like accolades, we will still be, people will still question that and will question our knowledge, and, because of what we look like, the accent or the communities that we come from, right? I know that I've been through all that, but it's still hard. And let me tell you that I've had my fair share of times where I wanted to kind of give up on Instagram because this is hard work. Honestly, I don't think people realize, like, it takes so much for me to post, like just the post that I posted today about Thanksgiving and acknowledging like what it means from an Indigenous perspective and how that's missing in the anti-diet conversations. Like, that takes so much courage. People probably don't even realize that.
No, they probably don't. And that's such a frustrating part about Instagram is the like trolls and the people that will come at you. It's like, if we were able to sit down in person and have a real conversation, is this really how maybe you would respond this way? But I feel like it really just gives this very big disconnect that's so toxic and inappropriate. But I appreciate the work that you share.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
And,
awareness.
and you said like, being an ally and what can you do by amplifying the work of others, right? But talking about these issues as well, like you can totally do that, go out, make yourself uncomfortable. Like we have to do it. And like other people decide not to. That's how privilege operates, right? So I challenge you to be a trailblazer and talk about these topics, and you'll see your audience, how it responds.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll see how they respond with this podcast.
No, this is literally what this podcast is about. But like, I want to push people to bring awareness. So yeah, all this is amazing. I hope that people respond positively and can like
for sure
continue to do the work, because I think anyone who's trying to learn about diet culture, well, there's certainly like a group of people who are doing diet culture work that are still very caught up in diet culture and perpetuating it. But I think
yeah, and you know how you said like what's one way to address it, or what is the solution? Like I said, one was like identifying what it is, and also understanding like how it's connected to different forms of oppression, right? And second, that diet culture, like obviously it impacts all of us, straight or sexual, cis, or anyone from the LGBTQ community. Like it doesn't discriminate color, it doesn't discriminate body size, right? All that. But what is important to understand and emphasize and continue those conversations is that if you are a racialized body, if you're Black and you're fat, right? If you're brown and fat, if you're Indigenous, like these are extra layers of understanding how oppression works and in diet culture, right? So that's why it's important to have this intersectional lens, right? That diet culture can impact everyone, but certain bodies and skin tones, there's different forms of oppression and how you're treated and even care, like medical care, as you already know, right?
Yeah.
Discrimination that you face if you're able-bodied or not, etc.
Yeah. In your culture, like within your family, some of the foods that you grew up really enjoying, what are the ones that are kind of under fire with the lens of diet culture?
Yes. Tortillas. I mean, I'm sure you eat tacos, right? Or like, I'm sure you have, right? So I think that's why I'm passionate. It's like, come on, like tortillas are safe. Okay, I'm Indigenous, right? My ancestors are Indigenous. And I think like corn is sacred to Mexico, to the Americas. And like, here's diet culture vilifying it. Like, that's hard. Like, really? Like, no. And I'm not going to call the diets out, which ones that say don't eat carbs. And when I go visit, which ones I'm talking about. And I have family members who, when we have a carne asada, which is a barbecue, guess what? They're eating lettuce wraps and cabbage wraps instead of the tortilla diet. And I'm like, I don't shame, right? Because part of like being right, I don't shame. And I just realized that's not sustainable. And they've been, on this diet for a long time. And like they're depriving themselves from like nourishment of food. But as a sociologist, right, then I think you're depriving yourself from this connection to your ancestral foods, from identity, from other things that I think sometimes diet culture tends to forget about. It's healing, like it's spiritual. It's like it could be so spiritual, like food can be spiritual, and diet culture is like shaming that. Like that's offensive.
No, it really is, because the things that you can bond over in diet culture when you're in it are so sad, and they might feel like a connection because so many people are bought into it and feel like they have to, but it's not fun to talk about your diets and to talk about how you feel out of control and like you can't do the right thing and you're not exercising enough and all these things. And it's just so limiting. Once you step outside of that and do that healing work to like realize like how much time and space that took up when, like you said, these beautiful connections.
Yeah, you lose so much, right? You lose so much when you're in diets, or even if you're not doing it. You remember, even if you're not doing a diet, we still have that diet mentality. I still have it. it's like, you know, when we're born, we're not born prejudiced, right? We're not born racist. You know, we're not born with the diet mentality. It's the same framework that I think, right? So there's a lot of inner work, a lot of inner healing that needs to be done. And like sometimes I have to rephrase sometimes what I say or with my kids. And I'm like, ooh, I have to catch myself. I just said that. Let me rephrase that. Cause you know, it's just so embedded, right? And it doesn't make me feel like I'm a bad person. It's just like, wow, diet culture is, it's still, I'm still, it's a lifelong journey, right? So I have a better relationship with food, but like, there's still, you know, I guess those thoughts there's a lingering like diet culture thoughts in my brain sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. And I think, like you said, it's so pervasive and it's a constant journey to make sure that you're like protecting yourself as you learn and grow from being susceptible to that after you've kind of like realized that that's not for you and that that's not going to work, along with all these other layers that you're talking about that aren't talked about enough of how oppression is layered on top of, and actually it's not layered on top of, it's at the foundation of really where the diet culture message
all over the place, right? But you know, part of that is a lot of empathy, right? And a lot of gratitude and compassion that is needed. The gratitude of what we have, right? The food that we have, where it's coming from, acknowledging, you know, the land, acknowledging the field workers, you know, the labor behind that food. So I think gratitude and acknowledgement is important, but also a lot of compassion with ourselves. And, you know, as you are aware, and we're really good at criticizing ourselves. We're like the worst, right? We do a lot of bad self-talk. We're really good at that, but we're not going to say that to other people, right? So we need to be compassionate with ourselves, you know, because that's also hurtful and harmful for our soul and for our spirit. And then the food that we're going to go ahead and consume and eat.
Yeah. What is something that you've found that has helped you with having more self-compassion in this journey that you've been on in life?
Yes. Well, one is my kids. My kids. I have 3 kids. I'm proud of my kids. I'm a proud mama. And so my kids are I look up to my kids, and I don't want my kids to go through what I went through. And they're going to go through this fat phobic diet culture, you know, and I can see that already. And it's hard. It's hard. So that's one. What was the other part of the question? Because I got sentimental.
Yeah, no, you're great. How you've learned to try and give yourself.
Oh yeah, my kids, right? So, and then I got caught up in my emotional state. It's, you know why I got emotional? It's because when I was going through my doctorate, my PhD program, I was one of the few women of color, one of the few Latinas, and I decided to get married and decided that we wanted to have a family, that I wanted to be a student and a parent at the same time. And that was hard, you know, being one of the few women of color and then being pregnant. Like, honestly, like I felt like there's this brown body occupying this space in campus. And like, it was like, I was like visible, but invisible. Like my brown body, my pregnant body was like visible, but I'm still invisible because I'm like a minority. Right. So like that was hard. And I get like, chucked up here because that really impacted like my relationship with my body. And like, obviously my baby, you know, like the ideas that I wasn't going to finish, that I was going to drop out. Cause there's a stereotype, right? That pregnancy, Latinas and all that. And like, I understand like those stereotypes and how they operate. And I'm like, and I'm thinking, I'm not another number, right? It's like internally, right? So that's why I say my kids, like I went through a lot in grad school because I had all my kids in my graduate like journey. So my kids are like, that's why they're like, my kids are the ones that led me to this healing, you know, that when I was in my 20s and then in my 30s. And of course, then I was like, oh, I'm gonna eat all healthy. And then I'm like, okay, I'm like totally like doing the opposite. I'm doing exactly what diet culture is saying about my foods. And then I'm like, okay, need to go back. Right. So that's why this journey of undieting it's not linear, right? We sometimes take a step forward, sometimes we take two steps back, maybe we deviate, go a different direction, but that's okay. That's why like being compassionate with oneself is important. And another part that has helped me a lot is just my connection to my family, to my ancestors, and being proud of who I am and my roots. Like that's my foundation. That's why that's why I'm so passionate. I hope you can see that. I'm just so passionate because I feel like it's my ancestors. Like I want to elevate like my culture foods. I want to elevate like not to be ashamed of our identities of who we are as we navigate, society as people of color, from marginalized communities and identities.
Yeah, absolutely. I can 100% see and hear and feel your passion for this. It's so beautiful.
Thank you.
How did you take back the tortillas in your life after you felt like they were this thing? Like, what was that process like for you? Because I work at a higher level of care right now with eating disorders. And so a lot of the work we talk about is reincorporating fear foods and really like trying to normalize things so that you can have a diet that's not biased based on external messages.
Right. Well, you know more than I do because that's your area. And I would love to like off this podcast, like continue to have these conversations, because, and collaborate with you, do like other amazing work because that's your expertise. But going to the tortilla part of or even just fear foods, right? Yeah. And I would actually ask you like, what would you do? But let me tell you first, and then you can tell me what you do, right? One of them is reframing foods, right? I think that's key. It seems like really like, yes, we have to reprogram our brain, all right, by the language. Like the language we use is so powerful, and it's a sociologist, so symbolic, it has meaning, right? So even though these are thoughts and our thoughts are not facts and they're not reality, what comes out of our mouth is powerful, right? So if I say that like tortillas are bad because X, Y, and Z, now I have to go back and say tortillas connect me to this. Tortillas are nourishment. Tortillas have this. Tortillas, for me, it has always been like, what? Tortillas is what allowed my family to survive in Mexico. Like because they were, we're still like poor in Mexico, but like all you had was cheese, maybe salt, and because like really, really poor. And what was the sustainability? Tortillas, just even eating the tortillas. That's why I get so emotional. Like that's resistance. Like that's how my family was able to survive. And so that's powerful. And I understand, of course, that there's different quality, different ingredients in tortillas, from organic to conventional, and the food coloring and the wraps, like I understand all that. It's a whole different conversation. Okay. The wraps. But yeah, so it's reframing those thoughts that then become more embracing and more healing. And of course, the fear will be there, for people, but you got to expose people to those fear foods, right? Slowly, but maybe one tortilla, maybe you ate a lot before, maybe you ate 5, I don't know, 4 tortillas. Well, maybe you want to start with 1. Maybe you want to have 2 tacos now. Maybe your 4 tacos or 5, that's okay, depending on the size of the tortilla. If it's double, just kidding. Yeah, because that's how when you eat, like when they have catering, like if you have a taco truck or like just catering, they have the small tortillas and usually it's double.
Yep.
And so like, okay, or do you want a regular one? And is it homemade? Like, is it made by hand? Like, so all that matters, but ultimately it's just integrating the food slowly, and just taking your time.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with all those things. I love finding the like nostalgic connection that people have, like growing up, what their culture was in their family, and like those foods that most kids could think of something that brought some joy. I think it's just so important, specifically with what you're saying, that your culture has been targeted with that, because I can get like a full disclosure, and I've talked about this on the podcast, but when I first came out of school as a dietitian, we're taught that the things that different cultures that aren't white diet culture, I guess, do are unhealthy. And I worked at WIC when I first came
Oh
out
my
of
gosh.
school, and I was like encouraged to talk to a lot of Latina women about how they needed to not eat such carb heavy foods and like swapping some of these things out. And I'm not over here like feeling like I need pity or anything. It was a mistake. But thinking just about how contributing to that oppression, like just
Yes,
coming out of
yes,
school, that's what you're
yes.
taught. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so toxic, and just hearing like
Mm-hmm.
where that connects and what it means. I think that people
Mm-hmm.
really don't think
Yeah.
about it, and they don't understand it's
Yes.
so important to
And it's
connect.
culturally, yes. And I appreciate it. And I'm so proud of you, and I'm proud of the work that you're doing, because now you have a different lens, and
Sure.
like, and you're an and being an outsider to the community, right? So like understanding like the privileges that we carry, or our education, and when we're not from the community, like what right do outsiders have to tell you about your foods? Like that's already a power dynamic, right?
Yep.
So it's problematic in so many ways. And
Yep.
even myself, like I always acknowledge my privileges when I'm in the community. When I work, see, that's why I'm so passionate, because I work with the most vulnerable communities. I work with undocumented immigrants who don't have like a kitchen, and I have to like provide like workshops where they can make foods when they're in a hotel, right? And it really pains me, it does, when like diet culture is saying like you should eat this and that. You shouldn't eat canned food. You shouldn't eat frozen food. You need to eat fresh fruits and vegetables. And like some communities they can't do that, right? And most of the times they're indigenous. They speak their native language, and they're vulnerable, right? And so I go and I say, look, I'm an immigrant. I'm educated. I have this, and this, and I'm here to learn from you. And that's how I begin all my workshops. It's like, let's talk about the foods that you grew up eating. Let's talk about what I ate. Let's talk about immigration, and how does like being undocumented impact your well-being. Like I talk about food at the end, and that's being culturally irrelevant, competent, and understanding your community. Like, and I see that, as I continue to see that that's a mistake that a lot of people make. They go in as these experts. Yes, they might know, but like you got to listen to the people who you're working with. They're the experts, right? We have a lot to learn from them. And that's why I'm humbled. And that's why I try to bring in my Instagram and be really like very with that conviction.
Yeah, no, I think that is so important, and something that really gets old really quickly on Instagram are these messages that are like, don't do this. It feels very much like I believe I am the expert. I have all the answers. Let me tell you what to do. Which I get where that comes from, because it's kind of a one-sided platform in that way of like you post your content and then conversation happens. But I agree, like the person is an expert, and we all, if we have a specialty, like can help like connect them with something. But really, like it is about their work, not what we can do.
For sure.
Exactly.
And and it's like, and I think it's important to acknowledge who you're talking to, right? Your audience. And on Instagram, I created this Instagram as a response to the lack of representation of Latinas, Mexicans, talking about anti-dieting approach. I have to thank, the trailblazers, Nalgona Positive Pride, and your Latina nutritionist, as two like trailblazers who are Latinas in the anti-dieting and eating disorder, so like shout out to them. I always acknowledge them, because it is because of them that I am here. But part of the audience is also like the representation, right? Like in social media, especially in the anti-dieting industry, health and wellness, there's still a lot of work to be done. So that's why I started my Instagram. And we have to position ourselves as experts, right? I have to position myself as an expert, as a Latina, as an immigrant, indigenous, knowing all this stuff, because I want my audience to learn from my perspective as a sociologist, right? But I'm not going to use a lot of the same language. I have to tailor my language to the communities that I'm going to be in, right? So we got to know who our audience is, what we're saying. I can't say the same messages I might do on a reel or that I post to, if I'm working with teenagers, or Latina women, college students, right? It's like, you got to tailor the material to their needs. What is it that they want to learn? And then I prepare that, but I also make it collective, also wanting them to share what they want to learn, so I can tailor the workshops.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that we have to wrap up here in a few minutes. So one, where can people find you and the work that you're doing?
Yes, I'm on Instagram at Dr. Hortencia Jimenez. I should spell that HOR. You got it?
I'll link it for you in the show notes and everything. But if you want to spell it, go ahead.
Sure. Well, it's at Dr. Hortencia Jimenez. It's DrHortenciaJimenez. And I just started a TikTok recently. And, I feel uncomfortable. I'm not a social media person. So I know, believe it or not, I'm not. So this whole Instagram and TikTok is totally off my comfort zone, but I'm doing it because I feel like that's the calling that my ancestors are making. So my TikTok is the same, at Dr. Hortencia Jimenez.
Awesome. And then I just was wondering, what is something, you've said so many wonderful things, but that you want to leave listeners with to think about as an action item, whatever you want.
Yes. Oh gosh. A lot of things. One is to just honor your journey, honor where you're at in your life, give gratitude for all the things that you have. And give gratitude to other people. I think, sending that to the universe, where I don't know how you say it in English, the more we give, if it's a smile, acknowledgement when you're walking down the street, just being in presence and community with other people that you may not even know. I think we live in a very, individualistic society. We don't even say hi. We don't acknowledge people. I'm a professor, and in my courses, my students know each other. I don't know, when you were in college, you sat with someone the whole semester and you didn't even know their name. That's not going to happen in my classes. That does not happen. So being present with yourself, with your body, being connected to your foods, but also collectively, we're all connected in this virtual, space with the universe. So just that, I guess. I could go on and on.
I know. I feel sad that we have to end our conversation today. We'll have to pick up at another time. But thank you so much for being here and for being so vulnerable and sharing, and for all the work that you do.
No, thank you so much again for reaching out. I was I'm excited.
Yes, this is fun. Well, have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Diet Culture is co-produced by myself and my brother, Nick Lewis. You can keep up with what's going on with Diet Culture on my Instagram page at Dietitian Dani Cast. If you prefer to watch rather than just listen, check us out on YouTube, and we always love ratings and reviews if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much for your support, and can't wait to talk to you next week.